Let's see if you can tell. This is a presentation about WordPress, and you might wonder, what is all this about? Being WordPress something very simple, but in fact, I'm going to focus my presentation to security. I'm not going to teach you how to set a WordPress site, but offensive and defensive security. Before getting to the presentation, I will speak a little bit about myself. I will introduce myself. I work as an auditor for SVT Security Service. I also have some other projects in addition to the usual work at a security company. I'm responsible for security audits. I do not work with hardware or any other thing. I just try to break things in a way, which is not always easy. As I said, I am in a project. The name is Hack and Bees. I am co-founder of this project together with a team. I write in 90 publications since 2009. I don't really have much time to write. I'm also a member of the Curtuba Congress that we held in Cordoba. It's a free congress, and I'm also a member of Solidarity Hacking. They are altruistic projects. Some of them, we don't get much profit from them, but we might think that if something is for free, it may not be worthwhile, but I participate in those non-profit projects because I love them. And in my free time, I just teach people about security. I help parents to teach their children, and my presentation will be available to you. This is my disclaimer, as my friend Fran advised me to introduce in my presentation, and therefore I'm not responsible for any illegitimate use of this presentation or any of the content. I hope you don't start breaking devices after hearing my presentation, and therefore the contents are for teaching purposes. I will start by the most boring part, introducing WordPress in case you don't know much about it. WordPress is a content management system, a CMS. To create a website is user-friendly and simple. It belongs to what we know as CMS, content management systems. It was launched in 2003, so it's been on for quite some time. The license is GPL in open source. Is free software is not the same as open source, and is been optimized for SEO. Today, what is important what is going to make us well known is our SEO positioning. Why WordPress? Because it's very popular. I'm not going to use a CMS that is used in China by just 100 people. It wouldn't be meaningful. Here, as I showed you before, 28.9% in internet. I don't know much about those statistics, although they are taken from a reliable data source. But 28.9% is WordPress use, is used by almost 76 million users of WordPress.com. And just some statistics. This is my source, as you can see in the slide. We speak about millions of users. Here are some more statistics about the use, 29% from a rather reliable source. And Joomla, Drupal, Magento, and some others. That's why I chose WordPress. We also have many customers, business, and people that contact me by Twitter or private message, and they ask about the WordPress, about its vulnerabilities, or when I reported about any potential vulnerabilities related to a mistake or failure in the settings. Because WordPress is used by thousands and millions of people, we have thousands of potential victims. If we're using a CMS that is used just by 100 people, then it wouldn't be worth to start considering it. It's quite popular and is the only system with more than 40,000 complementary features. This data is 6 months old. 40,000 plugged in that we can add to WordPress at the official repository. Outside it, it'll be an unlimited number, almost an additional 40,000. So we have a very important entry vector, the use of WordPress without plugins, and then we have the plugins as an entry vector. This is also going to be quite important. When I will show you a concept test, you will realize what I'm talking about. Just to give you some more information, this screenshot is 1 year old. It provides information about hacked websites, and those are the samples of a shell in a remote, and you see how can you inject a shell in a very few lines, and those are the results. If you search in internet, you will have loads of information. Get to the shell, just limit yourself to the search. Do not cross this threshold. And you might wonder, I am a poet, I publish my beautiful poems in WordPress. Why would anybody attack my WordPress site if I'm just an artist? The reason, it might be quite logical. The CEO, we can use a website, and I will introduce it later on, but a group of a hacked website can improve the CEO of another website. You can change the code, so to benefit from your positioning for spam massive campaigns, if you realize in filtering the spam, they just say your server is doing this or that. So if they're sending spam, they can get to send ransomware, phishing, the famous ransomware that we are all talking about nowadays. As I said, they can send malware through a ransomware. They can steal passwords, banking information, credit cards. I found WordPress sites that are very easy to break in. Anybody can just get the passwords. And is also used for pivoting to attack a third site using yours. You can get into a middle website just through pivoting, attacking some other websites, for example, for service denials. There might be other reasons. Maybe somebody's just boring and just likes to attack your website. The difference: targeted attacks versus non-targeted attacks. The difference is quite large. If they are targeted, you know that you are the victim. If they are not targeted, you will be a potential victim. This might be for personal reasons, because you just want to bother somebody. And the reasons might be many, due to, as I said, personal reasons. It is targeted only to your WordPress site. And we're speaking about WordPress here. So it will be a total attack. And then if you want or if they want to get some economic benefit from your website or lower their reputation, then we have the most common ones, the non-targeted attacks. There aren't any personal reasons. They are based in default settings, and the attackers almost never are not interested in what you say in your blog devoted to trains. They don't care about your personal comments. And there are many different internet tools, Google, Bing, that can localize websites just by pure boredom or using an API at a specific version, and they can apply different systems to attack your website. Those would be what we call automated attacks. OWASP uses or is based in secure development for secure developments, and you can also audit cell phones and websites based on certain controls that are applied to all security layers, from the most basic ones to the more sophisticated as dynamic analysis. OWASP, or almost everybody uses OWASP to follow a secure methodology. A few days ago, we now have the OWASP Top 10 with some slight modification, with information about the most common controls. Okay, let us get to the nitty-gritty. We have just gone through the introduction that is quite boring. It was quite boring, but now we are going to get to the gist of my presentation. About hardening, what are we going to defend? Are we going to limit ourselves to the WordPress dashboard and do we fill it with plugs in, or are we going to get a little bit farther? As you can see, I will give you some recommendations for the hardening at the server level and at the WordPress level. What about the server? These conditions will not be 100% met. They are quite difficult for different reasons. when people ask me or tell me I want to have a website in WordPress or any other, VPS is more expensive. Yes, it's true that it's more expensive. You can have a share hosting with your neighbor if you don't want to pay. To avoid share hosting, if our WordPress is secured and my hosting neighbor is not, it wouldn't be very useful if they access my neighbor's WordPress or website and they can escalate, and this has been the case on many occasions. And share hosting is more difficult to have root access to our server in order to do the necessary amendments. We don't need limitations in this case. One of the recommendations is not to use SH access. A basic user should log in, and once they are inside, root should always be limited to SAH, and to reduce the exposure area, if we're using Apache or Engil, this should be uninstall. It should be a limiting setting. Is quite a pain, but we reduce the exposure area. It's not the same to have 100 ports open than just one. The use of an updated release of the OS, this is quite common. We all speak about updating, and me, myself, I don't always have everything updated, whether because I forget. The servers should always be updated with releases control and ports control. The use of new PHP releases in Apache or Gings, always to have the updated release, even though the availability may not be compatible or our customer has things that are not compatible with our website, but there are many different ways to test everything before updating it. Of course, the use of powerful passwords. In theory, everyone knows about this, but in practice or in real life, the situation is quite different. A dual authentication factor. I just wrote the acronyms here. Dual authentication factor. Not only Google, there is a multiplicity of services that offer the dual authentication service by email, by SMS, or through an application. We can use different means, and even then they can hack your account. As a colleague told me yesterday that one of his friends, they stole him 2 Bitcoins, even using a dual authentication factor. And this is what happened to him. Another important recommendation is the port knocking. Is quite a pain, and if you want to do quick changes, it's difficult. Do you know about port knocking? Does it ring a bell? I just explain it. Port knocking is to close the SSH connection to the server. If we connect port 22 or we change the port to have another one, we wouldn't be able to log in. In order to log in, we need to make different calls to the ports 10 from our team so that the port is open in the server. And the service SSH, we can call port 81, 900, and 1024. So in order to close, we add a different combination. So we reduce the exposure area. Is also restrictive. It's quite a pain when I have to change things and I don't know exactly what type of port we have to change. It's very simple. Then we have anti-DOS service as a mode evasi for Apache in GINS. I don't know so much about this mode. My block possible attacks of service denial at the level of the applications. If they want to damage our router, it does not protect it. I'm speaking about the applications level. It's quite powerful, it's easy to set. And another recommendation is port sentry. It can set the ports you want to show when there is a scanning, and they are what we call faked ports. Another recommendation is faked one. When they apply strength to the SSH, they block the users, the IP, the host, and this is quite simple to install and is not very much used at a user's level. Maybe at the business level either, but why are we going to allow 100 intrusion attacks? At the fifth or sixth attack, we should block our system. There are many other things that we can apply at a server level, but it'll be too much, and I don't want to be too elitist here. Now, port sentry, if I'm scanning the port, what does it happen? We have ports that are not really up and running, ports that do not even exist. I'm just trying to visit my enemy, and this is a scan of the ports that are really open with the port sentry switched off. We can fine-tune or set up until incredible limits, and there are beautiful settings and some others that are not. This is a really basic way of setting things by default.
A nivel servidor, podemos automatizar.
We can automate this through scripts that are targeted towards the directory where WordPress is hosted. I'd like to mention something that I believe is very important. For those of you that are not familiar with this, Daniel Maldonado's plugin is pretty cool. What it does is as follows. Here you have the window. You can apply these settings to change authorizations for folders. You can apply a restrictive authorization directory. You can apply TXT files, robot files. It's a very interesting plugin. There's also an option for TintUp libraries that were vulnerable. It also has a wizard. A wizard for BlueGen. It's quite interesting if you take a look. And in this new version, he has included a malware scanner. Much could be said regarding malware analysis, because there are many infected sites that are hard to clean, and there are very interesting applications for malware. But we don't have time to cover this here. And he also has an application that I haven't tested, which is GF Firewall. That is, well, a kind of firewall. So I invite you to check Daniel Maldonado's plugins. let's get into the gist of the matter here, into the nitty-gritty. In terms of the server, what is most important? Well, if we have PHP that unfortunately is a bit old, you need to disable the register global variables, and this means that whenever we want to introduce changes or do updates, an error message is published. This is something we need to consider when updating. What may be very comfortable can be problematic. We need to disable the safe mode. We need to disable as well some features that shouldn't be activated or enabled. Path through PHP info, and there are many HP info in Andalusia. There's a myriad of PHP info in the internet that provides you with interesting information. Whenever we do information gathering, which is the first step of an audit, this is interesting, of course. So whatever you're not using, you should disable. That's the rule that you should follow. It's pretty simple. Another tip or advice for you. Well, we need to modify where we have the HPI files, and we need to tell the computer what it needs to run or execute. We need to also specify where our WordPress is. Depending on the operating system we're using, it would be in one directory or another, but this doesn't change much. We need to tell the software where it is, and it will only execute the WordPress there specifically. If we want to fine-tune this further, although maybe I'm getting too detailed here, but we could do a cage to cage everything in and isolate it. That's also interesting and advisable. And I wanted to include an observation here, because some people believe that with the main function or feature, we can bypass this. However, it's very important to disable this in our WordPress site. Of course, there's a technique to surpass Open Machine, but it's not easy. It's got some complexity. We need to protect the HT file so that it's not accessible. That's where we're going to introduce or specify the denied IPs. We shouldn't do absurd backups, HC access, .back.xp. You should not do these backups. That's not a good idea. If we want to do a backup, it's better to do it outside the public directory. And another piece of advice is to not list directories. We need to disable the index of. There will come a time or a moment of time in which you introduce a file that you believe is protected, but it will be listed and you will be able to see the contents thereof. So this is not advisable. As for directory lists, there are many, an infinity, and I found even administrator passwords, believe it or not. So this is not theory, this happens in practice. Let's move on. The gardening, that's a weird term. Gardening in the context of WordPress and servers. We need to avoid user numbering. Why? Because if we avoid this, They won't be able to know what users or how many users we have. We're not giving them clues. We want to hide info from enemies. If we know that the user of WordPress is admin 2017/p, we know that we need to apply the brute force of that user. If we're unaware of the user, well, we can't do that. So we are hiding info. And then exposure service. That's also an important variable. This could be basically summed up as reducing exposure surface. How do we avoid user listing in WordPress? Well, by modifying the database. And you may say, well, in adjustments, we can change the alias. Yes, but you need to do this at a database level. We need to be very, very careful with this as well, with these changes. We need to also change or modify the value of the table WP user and the user next name as well. Here you can see a sample of a user listing. Who has used WP Scan? Yeah, you've all used WP Scan. It basically lists the users and the plugins. Sometimes it invents the results, but it's quite interesting because with experience you're able to distinguish the users. What am I trying to say here when I refer to nice name? And the table that I use, we modify the value. Let's imagine that my user is admin. And in the row or in the column where there's a matching between that and the username, I can introduce my changes. What can I do? Well, instead of admin, I could enter, let's say, webmaster. In that case, the user will see that the article has been published by webmaster, but we won't be telling him that the article has been drafted by webmaster.
Bueno, esto WPCAM, esto es un déjà vu.
Well, I've already covered this, so déjà vu. How can we list users? Yes, perhaps using a script, but perhaps that's not the best way around it. Why are we going to reinvent the wheel? Some people may say. We can list the users with that URL I've included on the slide. With that slug that you can see, we can list users. And there are a myriad of sites that have lists of users. We're talking about usernames here. And we can also obtain the WordPress version with that call or request to that file. And some sites specify the WordPress version that you're using. We're trying to get to know our site better. We have our website. We're going to check and verify user listing, and we're going to make that request to the program. Then we verify WP links, open mail, and you'll get to know WordPress version we're talking about. Once again, user numbering. We can change the alias. This doesn't mean that we're changing the username. No, not at all. We're just changing the nickname. And then you have the username field. And that's the value you will have to modify in order to deceive your enemy. Good. This is something I've already covered. If we have an HTTP address, we connect it to the Wi-Fi and introduce or enter our username. Well, we've basically messed up already. That's not the way to go. Let me give you some advice. We can change the profile, but if we change the profile, then we forget about the changes we introduce, and some people believe it's better not to modify profiles. The idea is to be able to hide info to enhance security. I know very little people that isolate WP-Comfy outside the public space. The idea is that the root isn't inside our public site. If we make sure that it's outside, we are protecting WP-Comfy, which is where our username, our SAP, our database password are. Another piece of advice is to protect WP admin, to disable the template editor. Let's imagine I have my topic, I've customized it, or I've downloaded it from a link that I've received, an infected link. I have my site up and running, and I'm not willing to introduce constant changes. I have the template editor enabled because I don't intend to introduce changes in the near future. Modify error messages regarding the logging. If this message pops up, what will happen? Well, depending on the message you receive or the logo, you'll know what version we're talking about. You can understand what version you're talking about. We can modify logging error messages. As we will see, change in the prefixes of tables. This is something that we can do. WordPress _. It's very important to do a backup before we do this to avoid a scare. And if it's work in progress, we need to be very, very careful. We can change prefixes as described on this slide. You can use the plugins specified there. And let's be very, very careful when we're talking about websites that are being developed. And then it's very important that we're careful with the wp-config.php. We need to create a new PHP configuration or setting file within the WordPress root. Well, I said earlier that it had to be outside the folder. So why am I saying this now? Why are we going to create another wp-config.php? As you can see, this is the request to the one that's outside, or the call. So we're able to prompt the wp-config, because without this, without the config.php in the directory, it won't work. So we're making a call, making a request to wp-config. We're telling him that, or telling it rather, that it's isolated. Now let's be very, very careful with the open base deal. We need to be very, very careful. This can also be problematic. You're going to see how the clocks pop up repeatedly. Let's be very careful with this feature as well. Disabling template editors. If, as I said, everything is ready, it's up and running, and looks wonderful, why are we going to have this feature enabled? With wp-config, you can define interesting features. Define a file edit, and this allows you to edit the topic. You can enable or disable this. And if you disable this, basically you're protecting vulnerabilities. That's the idea behind this. That's the reason behind this. Then security keys that need to be added to the logging process. There's an API to generate randomly the security keys. You can do this through WP config. It's hard for me to pronounce this. And this provides yet another security layer to the logging process and to the encryption of plugins. As I said at the beginning, in my presentation now is going to cover all these features. We need to protect files, we need to protect HP access and HPass access. So, this means that everything that starts with .hp is denied. So there's no way around this. Wow, the sun is shining. So there's full denial. So we're protecting this. To prevent directory listing, you may think that it's very difficult, that there are many files. If we have an empty HTML, we're preventing directory lists. It's a bit of a clumsy way of doing this, but it can be done. It'd be better, however, to use Apache if you enable option indexer. Okay, move scalable, or rather key directories. We're fine-tuning here, we're honing. So this means that we will, of course, have further work to do, and the management or administration of this site will become more complex. WP plugins, RTs. It's hard to move. We need to have a directory, but it can be, the new topics can be installed in new directories. And we need to be very, very careful with open base. Hiding. It's hard to see, the font is small. Hiding the set of errors. If we enable wp-config.pht, we're enabling these lines of code so we won't see errors. So when malicious attackers want to access our site, we won't reveal absolutely anything to him about our WordPress site. Protecting WP admin. We can add with HP Power that when someone clicks, or rather enters WP admin in our URL, this person will be asked to enter a password. Hiding default versions. For those of you that do audits, if we're working with WordPress, this is of great help because you know what the WordPress version is. If the WordPress tells me that it uses save development, we know it's version 4, for example, and if it's version 4.7, as we will see now, we feel very much reassured. You can hide the default version. We can disable this function, this feature. But whenever you update WordPress, that default version is re-enabled. We can directly block this using Apache. And I can, for example, block license, and I can introduce the version. I'd also like to say that each time we update WordPress, this appears once again. So it doesn't make much sense to erase it. In Apache, we can block this with those lines of code that you can see on screen. And that's the end of the story.
Bien, la famosa REST API.
Okay, the REST API. Basically, this allows you to list users. This is what I was saying earlier regarding WP. And the idea with this is to list users. This is another way of listing users. And of course, there are other techniques that are author-based that use the IDs that can be used, but RED API allows us to list users, and there are many sites, important or major sites, that allow you to access to the surnames of the users. They create users, add surnames. You have a great amount of info there. You can block these using plugins. Plugins not only aimed at blocking the API network. If we don't want to complicate our lives further, we can use this option. So, anti-denial of service, DOS, is easy with Cloudflare. With Cloudflare, we can protect our site at an application level. Let's be careful with Cloudflare apps, because if the subdomains are not well set, we cannot install the IPs, and we can have our service crashed. There is a free scheme, but let's make sure that we're careful, because if you receive many visits, well, the speed is very much affected, and it can be very frustrating. If you don't have many visits, it's a very simple and effective method, and you can disable it. I remember a colleague and I we're talking about this, and we were talking about whether we have to enable or disable this function. I would disable it always, always. I believe that we should go for maximum censorship, because they can perpetrate denial of service attacks, and with this method they can crash your site. You can well, affect the speed of the site. And there's a plugin. It's true that it can be blocked via HP Access, specifying that all the calls or requests made to RPC should be attacked. Or we can install the plugin Attacks Blocker or Stop RPC Attack, as you can see on the screen. Jetpack allows this. It's restricted, but they are aware about the request or the call, and there's a filtering that is done. It's a plugin. It's a good plugin, so to say. What else can I say? Another thing that you can find yourself with. Brute force to check your logging. If we only have the user, of course, there's much that we can do. They're not going to access our password, but they will access logs. So the solution would be, of course, plugin, and I'm going to mention several plugins that I like to use. And the Google version is pretty good. It works pretty well. I'm a bit fed up of selecting the boxes, but that's the price you need to pay to protect this. Two-digit authentication via text message or email. If you change mobile phone, things get complicated. It's quite a bore. I decided to stop using Google Authenticator because I changed smartphone, and it was always very cumbersome. But there was this option of installing the app in your mobile. Then you had the login, and using your smartphone camera, you were able to log into the system. Of course, you had to enter your credentials. I don't have a screenshot, of this. It was a free app, but it's no longer available. It was quite interesting though. It was cool. And then we have the Do Mobile. Basically, you receive a text message with a code, or on your smartphone, you have an alert. You receive an alert through the app, and you decide whether you want to accept or not the connection. Then there's the logging, and then you have to wait and see what happens. Another important thing that I like to mention, you need to hide or veil the back end. We can introduce a sentence, I don't know, or we need to enhance security through hiding, as I like to say. We can use plugins. We can change the config, WP config, and this changes the route for logging access. We're trying to make the attacker's lives more difficult.
Respecto al login, bueno,
Recommendations about the login to limit login access. Why are we going to keep the access active at 4 a.m.? What might happen after a good night of partying, and we might have the urge to publish polemic things. So this is a limit against possible excesses. Why are we going to keep our login active? Are we going to publish anything from 4 to 6 or while we're working? So we can just manage things with a timetable. Limiting the access of countries, that limiting the number of countries that can access your WordPress. If my blog is a poetry blog and it's poetry in Spanish or in Catalan or Galician, Basque, are Chinese citizens going to read my blog? I don't think so. So why are we going to give access to Chinese or Russians that do not speak our language? So we're going to limit the number of countries. Warfare does this limitation, although you have to pay. But also we have we can limit it in the HTC, and to block Tor we can use WP Maltor, so they don't access to the Tor plugs in that might really limit Tor access. WP Martor and a couple more. There are not too many that do a good job, and a harsh way is to consult the list published in internet about Tor nodes or Tor range and include it in the HTC file, although if the file is too large, the performance might be impacted by this. And I'm going to mention an article I published last year about limiting server access by IP table. It was after a conversation I had with a good friend that works at networking, and a customer asked him if it wouldn't be possible to block Tor access to the server from Tor, not just to a website, but just to a server. And he said that the manufacturer didn't block this, but the users could not get outside Tor. It was difficult to implement, and I thought that this might have had an easy solution. Using IP table, you download the sites, you make a cron, and you update the list, you check them, and you add this information to the IP table every time a Tor site wants to visit our site is just blocked, and every 3 days, a week, or a month you can check the list or the IP addresses, and you add the kind of IP table. It doesn't really need much time, and we can therefore protect our server, not only at the level of WordPress, but at the level of our IP.
Bien, plugin.
Plugins. Here I could just devote a whole presentation to the plugins. A backup plugins. We need backups. Is going to save our life in case of catastrophic event. If we want to limit gross attacks, we need attempts, limit login attempts to check the security of our WordPress using Ultimate Security Checker. For spam, we have Jetpack, Acmet. They are very useful. WP Audit Log shows you or monitors and shows users changes, whether they have changed a post, changed the nickname. Is very interesting. It has a professional version, but the free one is quite good, and if we haven't had any incident, it provides good information about security plugs in WordFence, and those are free. If we hire or buy some others, they have very effective functionalities. WordFence, ITM, it protects from gross attacks, and there are some others that you can see in the slide. It works with WAB for the host, for temporary users, for giving them time, for example, a year. Ninja Firewall, I didn't try it very much, but it goes fine. And Secure has a very interesting plugin. Maltor is also worth mentioning to block Tor access, and Google reCAPTCHA. That is the best of them, but you have to be filling many forms. It's quite a nightmare. And Cloudflare against Tor attacks. If you want to do a good job, please invest and buy a version that might support many other things. Here I say that the hosting is important. If we have a shared hosting or a limited hosting with limited resources, if we install plugins, there will be memory error. So it's important to have not to use limited hosting. We should use a good one. We should pay the necessary money so that we can use plugins. Another interesting plugin, head control, because it's not quite cryptic. Sometimes we forget about it, but there are plugins that protect against KSS so that certain attacks will not be realized. We just install this plugin and it activates some headlines so that there are different queries that are not allowed, only using HTTPS protocol. HTTP protocol. This is interesting. We can change it to Apache. when we have different WordPresses in the same server. This in relation to plugs in. Now, information tips now. Never think that default settings are okay. We should always try to do the settings ourselves and spend some time. Do not install complements outside the repository. Why? If you download Forfence for free in Mediafire from a Russian forum, and there are quite interesting things there. I'm sure this has some degree of malware. Nobody gives anything for free. Do not install those things. We are risking and opening up potential entry vectors. We should analyze the complements within the repository. Sometimes, I don't remember about the plugin, but it was one that had malware. They erased it. They download the plugin again. It still had malware with a backdoor, and up until 4 times they had to erase it and upload it again. And therefore, a plugin that does not have many iterations, look for it. There isn't always time to do it, but it's important. So be aware of plugins or premium items. This is my cost, 80 euros or dollars, and I found another one that it looks as interesting, but for half the price. Be aware of this. The use of robust passwords. No matter how often we say how important this is, but robust passwords are not always used. We should use limit admin users. There are different roles, and we have to limit this. Who's going to manage? Who's going to be the admin? Not everyone can be an admin user. To take into account DOS protection for performance and availability. If we are detecting an attack, we can access a panel in the plugin itself, and we can activate the red button, as Manu said. We should take this into account if we want to protect CDN, whether we have a DOS protection or a better performance. Once we install WordPress, we shouldn't let it on its own to self-protect. Sometimes we need to do ongoing audits and update things. If we are the only managers, to have periodic audits, we might delay it. We know if we have made changes, if we have introduced new files or new plugins, but if there is the same blog with different managers, is advisable. And then update plugins and WordPress releases. Almost anybody does it, and we should do it all. Plugins are not updated because we fear of breaking in our designs, and WordPress, they say that may no longer work, but their updating does not affect anything. You have your updated database in a backup, then we shouldn't fear updating the plugins. And why? Why all of this? We don't really see much of this screen, but the other day, the Black Friday soda account was just $5 when the usual price is $49. This is just an ad, but if you look for soda I don't know if you can see it better now. Yes. If we look in SODA, this chain, this makes reference to a vulnerable plugin. You find 219 results. If you search in Google, there will be many more. You can index it, and somebody that is quite boring and has nothing to do, they can spend their time. It's a Friday night, there's nothing to do, and they see our site and they can attack our WordPress site. We can search for this information, for IPs, ports, and this is a map. This is a wonderful map for representation, but it doesn't really say much. Doesn't really give much information than the previous slide, but it locates your website in the map. If we search in Google, I don't know if you can see it in the screen, but using the lens, if you look for this, you have 500,000 results, approximately 557,000 indexed. And as you see, this is just a hypothetical example when a hacker is bored at home and they wish to attack our website. And now is demo time. All videos are recorded because doing it live was more tricky. And the first concept test use of a vulnerable plugin, we can download the files. For example, WP-Comfy. With this plugin, the vulnerable use of this plugin is just through a call at the URL. We download it and it's as easy as this. Let us see now a demo.
Bueno, ya está esto funcionando. Esto no se para ni que le dé yo ni nada.
This is not working.
Aquí aparece. Primera prueba.
Now the first test. As you see, is in a local server. Update WordPress now. Here we have the vulnerable one. There are many, even though it's a previous version.
Aunque sea una versión anterior.
Even though it's a previous version, there are many sites with this plugin for moving images or pictures.
Bien, ahora lo que vamos.
Now we're going to look for the exploit in the database display. I'm sorry.
O sea, tiene su tiempo ya.
From 2015, and I insist there are many different sites that are vulnerable, and with this URL through a call, we can download it. It's very, very easy. Now we're going to see what happens. The S file is downloaded, and here I have the database user and the password. And I've set this at a lab, but this is in internet. It's not something that I'm just presenting. is something that is real. The WP Confi is going to be downloaded, and all of this information is on internet. You cannot test it because it's illegal, but I've done it and it's very easy. You don't have to be an expert. Here, what I'm showing you is a plugin that says whether it's vulnerable or not.
Esto, vale, nos está diciendo nos está comprobando
Is checking if my WordPress site is vulnerable or not. When they say vulnerable target or objective, and then it brings the file WP-Confi, what we did before manually with a URL, we can now do it through a plugin. And it's the same test, but through different pathways, two alternatives, therefore. And here I show you the whole process. We could do it even live against one of our websites, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stop this demo here. The first test, as I said, with the use of red slider. There are numerous number of sites with this plugin, and I'm sure that they have, or they can download many people's file. The second test, WordPress, not plugin. Now, the WordPress vulnerable release that can modify an entry that is published, already published. They can just change it. They can set a different picture, write another article, introduce new information. I'm now going to show you the video with the second test. This is my WordPress website that is made for this presentation. And what I'm doing is just loading the website. Let us see the entry by default as a reference. We see that there's nothing there, so we can go on. Okay, this is just a test. Let us see that the release is 4.7. There are many in Google that is no longer in process. They don't use those that are no longer in process. And WordPress offers information about this, but we don't always pay notice to this. Another plugin, therefore, Plug Database. This plugin in Python analyzes. It has different options. One is to analyze the number of articles so that we choose the article we want to change. Obviously, as I said before, we can test this in our website. To do it in a third party's website is illegal. Don't even try, because you can end up in trouble. So you see the published pockets, and some of the data is related to the ID of the article we want to change. Let us write it in big letters. This never fails. Okay. We call Python with the exploit. We provide ID information about the article we're going to change. We don't need privileges or anything. We are at a server level, but we could be somewhere else. Here we're going to create a contents file. This is going to be very important for the third concept test, to change an article, for example. A D-frame. Okay, here, the contents of what we are going to do. You see, the post that was modified and is now complete. And let us check now if this is the case. I load the page and I see the modification. Many sites were hacked because of this vulnerability. Here I also show, this is quite complex, but I'm showing with this video the user numbering with enable res API. Here the username, tests, and there are many different active sites. So I imagine that if we introduce this information, we can name the user. This is another easy way. When we're auditing our website, let us check if the users go and follow this process or some other.
Bien. Aquí. Aquí hago una búsqueda.
Here I do a search.
Voy a hacer una búsqueda de posibles sitios que...
Going to search potential sites. That might have readme and also index of a directory list. There are many thousands results, although they are not limited to WordPress. Google search is very flexible when looking. As you can see, we have millions of directories, 166 million results that have this. Obviously, not all those millions are devoted to this or are in the cache but are not active. But only with having 1 million sites, that would be important enough with index of. This is the video or the demo, and I make reference to the fact of updating. And now I'm going to move to the third test. That's the most striking of all. The third test, let us have an XSS, because it's the same vulnerability as WordPress 4.7, and through a HavaKill we're going to insert 10 characters shell, those that are short, and we're going to use the URL as a console. But it has its problems. First, we're going to do an XSS. We're going to use the same exploit but different content. Instead of a text, we're going to use characters. Here, what I'm teaching is that it's empty, there's nothing there. This is not a trick. And this is a real test. Here, what we do is we're gonna benefit from the fact that WordPress allows embedded code for some services, for example, YouTube. If we add some other websites that is not on the white list of WordPress or that is not active to allow embedded code, then we will not be able to do it. Therefore, we're going to use YouTube domain just as embedded code. We work with this URL, and what we do here is character bigger than, which is a V. Otherwise, WordPress cannot follow the process. And we're telling them that when the embedded code is loaded, it should show an alert.
Y ahora cerramos igualmente con los caracteres capados, ¿vale?
Okay, we've got the characters capped because otherwise WordPress blocks this. So we cap them. We save this. So the content has been already uploaded with that line. We upload it, we enter F5, and here we are. So websites with 4.7, we can add this, we can send a screenshot. Okay, here you can see that the code has been injected. And as I'm saying, this console is not related to the admin user. Now, what we're going to do is exactly the same, or well, quite similar, but we're going to inject malicious Java script that makes a call. A malicious JavaScript is prompted and it injects some lines of code.
¿Aquí qué vamos a hacer?
So, what are we going to do here? What am I doing rather? I'm going to convert that prompt, that JavaScript prompt, and the idea is that we're not restricted by WordPress. We're going to run the script. It's a bit slow. Bear with us. You can see the JS there. It can be, well, any website. In this case, we saved it in the same server. But we can make that prompt wherever we want. And what we're doing, as you can see, the malicious JavaScript is there. We copy the conversion, the entire conversion. We close the quote. greater than is a character, greater than, as you can see, and we save the content. And there is a request of embedded code. Here you can see the malicious JavaScript. This is published in the internet. There are many JavaScript codes that can be used to inject it in the shell, but it's one of the shortest ones. And here, in this part, starting here in this symbol before the question mark, there you have the shell. Up until there, okay? Up until the question mark, a CMD. It's a super short shell. You can go for a longer shell later on if you so wish. But you can do virtually everything. So, we're going to inject the shell in the Hello Dolly plugin, which is a default plugin of a WordPress, and we can inject it there or in 404 errors. And 404 errors, because that can be our asset. We can inject it in whatever file using the editor. For example, 404. This is an interesting site. That's where you can host it, because so you can make the call fast. And it's quite interesting. And the content is JS malicious. That's the name. We upload the site. Something strange happens, as you can see. Connecting. This means it's inserted. And here, as you can see, using the Hello Dolly plugin, I enter this and I obtain the directory where it's hosted. I'll introduce whatever other command I can think about. There we have the WP config. I make the call, and the idea is to be able to view the files. The WHTML can be used. It can be VP host. And the idea is to make calls. And here you can see part of the WP config code. Out key, etc. And now I'm going to show you the password file, PC password. We're using the IT as a console. This is what this shell allows us to do. We're just listing roots. We can see or view the users. It's just a matter of using your imagination. I'm going to access once again my WordPress site. I see that it's not loading. And as an admin, I'm gonna try to see what's happening, to know what happened with my article. So what I'm doing now is, once I obtain the shell, I send an empty file to re-edit the post, because I've already done the injection. The hello.hp is already injected. I don't want the site to suspect. This could be programmed in the same script in order not to repeat this process, and you can see that there's nothing there because I've inserted an empty content. So I use version 4.7 to insert a shell in WordPress. And now you may ask me, well, this is super important. If you take a look, I'm logged in as an administrator. I've clicked on the link being an administrator. So I have the power to edit code as an administrator. Should I not be an administrator, I wouldn't be able to edit hello.hp. I don't have the all authorizations required to edit this. So other users wouldn't have the site loaded and wouldn't be able to do this. Let's imagine that this is a very visited site and people start saying that it's not working, that it's crashed, and when those comments are posted, because I mean some websites need to have high availability, and if there are downtimes of, let's say, 10 minutes, people start complaining right away. They will click on the link over and over again. So, and the admin users has logged in or could log in to provide visitors with a link. So, as a result, this problem would escalate. If it's not a highly visited site, the attacker will send an email to different addresses to say that the site is not protected. He would launch perhaps some phishing campaign. And of course, the console needs to be located. You would have to conduct forensic analysis to know where he has access to restore, and if we restore the version, if we restore a backup from the previous day or the previous week or the previous month, and we continue with the same version, well, we're going to be attacked again. And this should work. So this is my small tribute to Chiquito La Calzada, and here are a list of interesting references. I like to introduce logwares, and if you work in this field, OWASP is wonderful. It's true that doing the controllers is a bore, is very cumbersome, but it works very well. OWASP works very well. The GitHub of Kcode, then Daniel Maldonado's plugin that I mentioned earlier is very interesting. Impactsor.com, that explains pretty clearly how we can modify an article, which is what I did earlier. There you can have also, or you can see an interesting reference another article that I wrote on CSL certificates in Cloudflare for subdomains, because there are some problems that GitHub code cannot cover. So for subdomains, this is a good reference paper. Uh, we will have to use certificates, and this article explains how to do this with, well, without much difficulty. And then the article I mentioned earlier regarding how we can block access to our server. It's also very simple and straightforward. It's a matter of reading the article in an hour. You'll have very clear ideas how it's done. And acknowledgements are often mentioned at the beginning. I left them for the end. I'd like to thank the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute in Tibet for inviting me to make this presentation. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the Gurtuba group. I say hello from here. I'd like to thank my company for giving me time off to participate in CyberCamp, and thank you to my grupete, my group of friends. They know who they are. Thank you. And my motto is learn, hack, and share. I love this idea. Learn, hack, and share. Share and share. It's all about sharing, because that's how we learn. You have my Twitter account there. You can follow me or threaten me via Twitter if you so wish, or maybe treat me to a beer, or if you come to Cordoba and you need a tourist guide, I can find one for you. I'm not very good at that myself. And Joke Society, you have questions. I don't know if you have time for questions, but I'll be happy to answer. If not, you can contact me via Twitter and ask me. I often answer very fast. But don't ask me how to hack WhatsApp or Facebook, because should I know how to do that, I wouldn't be here. So if you have any questions, yeah? Hello. You were saying earlier that one of the things we can do is limit access from different countries to our website. Do you know if we can limit access to specific URLs? For example, I can limit access only to the admin area, not the public site. Yes, in HT access, that's an option. HT access allows you to block a specific IP or to do whitelists. And only an IP can access there, or a range of IPs can access there. That's also an option. Yes, whitelisting. And in HP access, you can set that. It can be done. I haven't explained that, but HP access gives you that functionality. You need to, tinker with it for a while, but you can train it, and that's an option. It's quite flexible, a tool. Any further questions? Shoot. I don't know. You can ask whatever you wish. You can ask about trains. I love trains. If you have any questions, please feel free. Well, this isn't a question on trains, by the way. You said earlier that there are hosting companies that are better, others that are worse. I have some websites in my company, websites with which I work. Some are in a one-on-one basis, others in ARSys, and those are quite problematic. The SiteGround websites are not as problematic. What companies, in your opinion, are better? Well, I wouldn't put my stakes on any company. None. Absolutely no company. It's true that I like some more than others. Well, those that could have a better name, V8, but we know that V8 crashed in Europe. A second, I can't hear you, I'm afraid. SiteGround, the Instagram node had an attack, a DOS, a denial of service attack. I'm a bit disconnected these days here. Companies, let me think. V8 is pretty interesting. Of course, there are some drawbacks to it. Stratos is another interesting company. It is quite interesting. I don't want to, do advertising for these companies. Stratos has some good options, but also there are some caveats to it as well. I don't want to quote other companies. There's this very famous company that we all use, but I'm afraid the service this company provides is pretty flawed, and there's much room for improvement. And I'm not only referring to security, I'm also referring to availability, I'm referring to technical support. It's quite flawed. But I know it's hard to mitigate targeted DOS attacks. And this is the result of the activities performed by many botnets. So I wouldn't recommend one company specifically. I have this website that used ARSYS. There's this other company, Birdmatch, from the US, I believe. That's quite interesting. Some companies perhaps are not that famous, but can offer better services than the major companies. But I wouldn't put my stakes on any of them. V8, yes, we mentioned V8. It's a good company. I mean, it's not great, but it's pretty good. That's it, I'm afraid I can say. I can't provide you with further info. Any additional comments or questions? No? You can, of course, contact me, and I can provide you with a copy of my presentation. I imagine they'll upload it on the website. You can have access to it. Okay? I'll upload my presentation via Twitter as suggested. But if I forget, please remind me via Twitter. I have the cameras as witness. Well, thank you very much for attending. Some of you have had to stand up, but that's what happens.